The Microsoft ecosystem is evolving faster than ever. Copilot, Power Platform, security, modern work, Azure AI, new features every week, new opportunities every day. But learning is scattered. Events are expensive, limited, and difficult to access. That changes now. Welcome to M365Con, the world's largest online Microsoft 365 convention. 2 powerful weeks, 1 week of workshops, 1 week of free global talks and keynotes. Build your own learning path with expert-led workshops. From Power Platform to security, from Copilot to Azure AI, you choose what matters to you. Then join over 60 free sessions with most valuable professionals, Microsoft trainers, architects, and innovators from around the world. Meet the community, explore the virtual expo, connect with experts, and be part of a global Microsoft experience. Accessible, global, interactive, and designed for every Microsoft 365 professional. M365Con, your community, your learning path, your Microsoft 365 future.
Hello and a warm welcome to our second day on the M365Con. My name is Marcel. I am the CEO of the Power Bros. And today's topic and our guest today is Ken Weare from Microsoft. He's a product manager for Logic Apps. And our workshop topic today is connecting the enterprise using MCP Servers. In Copilot Studio, we get a small insight yesterday from Bülent. He's a Copilot Studio MVP. And now, today we have Ken Weare as a workshop leader here. Hi, Ken.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning.
So you could start. We see us at the end.
Sounds good. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks for putting on this event. This is super impressive what you folks have put together here. So, as mentioned, my name is Kent Weare. I'm a principal product manager on the Azure Logic Apps team here at Microsoft. And what we're going to talk about today is MCP servers and how we can go ahead and use those from Copilot Studio. And also, we're going to talk a little bit how you can use that from Foundry as well. I thought that would be interesting to go ahead and include. So just a little bit about myself before we get too far into this. So I've spent most of my career working on integration and automation. That goes back to kind of BizTalk server days, for those of you who may have heard of that product. And then kind of as the cloud emerged, I really started to get interested in the Power Platform, even before it was called the Power Platform. So I was a product manager on the Microsoft Flow team, the predecessor to Power Automate. And from there, I also worked on the PowerCat team inside of the Power Platform engineering team, where I focused on Power Automate Desktop, or RPA. Actually, it was before Power Automate Desktop even existed, for those of you who were involved back then. And then also Power Virtual Agents. So I spent some time, a couple years over there working on those technologies in the early days. More recently, the last 4+ years, I've been on the Logic App side of things. Now, I do have some additional references here. We'll include some links at the end of the presentation as well. But I do have an active YouTube channel. There's a lot of, I would say, Power Platform and the Copilot Studio or Power Virtual Agent stuff on there. Some of it is a little bit dated. I spend a lot of time these days more focused on the Logic App side of things, but you might find some interesting resources there. And then also I've launched a new blog called The Agent Frontier, and this is where it's all AI that I'm talking about, predominantly Microsoft AI. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Let me know you saw the session, and be happy to connect with you over there. Now, from an agenda perspective, I've got around 2 hours of content here, and certainly open to a lot of conversation. So feel free to add any sort of questions in chat. Happy to pause and go deep where there are questions, so don't be shy. And we'll definitely take a break along the way as well. So what I do want to provide is some background on Logic Apps. This talk is centered on using Logic Apps and our connectors as MCP servers. I realize for some of you, you may be new to Logic Apps, so it's probably worth spending some time over there. Then we'll dive into MCP servers and sort of what is sort of the background of MCPs, why are they important? And then I'm going to show a couple of experiences of how you can go ahead and build these MCP servers. So we've built experiences in API Center and in Microsoft Foundry that allow you to dynamically go ahead and build these MCP servers using connectors. And this is really an accelerator that gets you up to speed and gets you moving quite quickly. Then what I want to do in stage 5 here is I want to go under the hood and actually show you the underlying Logic app and sort of what was created from these wizards, and just give you more details of how this is actually working under the hood. So I'm going to give you that perspective. Then we'll get more into the Copilot Studio side of things, where we will go ahead and consume a Logic Apps MCP server that we built in step 3, and we'll go ahead and leverage that in Copilot Studio. And then we'll talk about other MCP server options from Copilot Studio, because you don't necessarily have to use Logic Apps. I feel there's some value in using Logic Apps, but you don't have to use it either. So I wanted to touch on that and make sure people were aware of those options. And then at the end, I'll share some additional resources and a call to action as well. So let's go ahead and let's jump right in. So Azure Logic Apps, what is it? It was actually funny. We were just talking with Marcel before about Logic Apps, and it's actually been around almost 10 years. It first launched in 2016. It actually launched before Microsoft Flow or Power Automate. And there's definitely some lineage there. There's some history there. There's some shared code between those two platforms, and there's a lot of similarities. So if you've used Power Automate, this is going to look very familiar to you. Now, inside of Logic Apps, we have 3 different deployment models. Logic Apps Consumption, Logic Apps Standard, and then Logic Apps Hybrid. And we'll talk about more details on the next slide about those. But the consumption tier is the closest to what you would see with Power Automate and Cloud Flows. We've built then some more kind of like enterprise features for Standard and Hybrid. And we'll talk about those more as we go through this. Now, we do offer this drag and drop visual designer, but one difference we do offer is we've got custom code extensibility built in. So you can go ahead and author .NET, C# code, PowerShell, Python, JavaScript, and have that right within your Logic Apps solution without needing to call out to external services. That's something that is offered. We do allow you to build workflows in the Azure portal or in VS Code. So obviously in VS Code, you have the ability to check in to source control and sort of plug into your CI/CD processes and see all of your underlying code and connections over in VS Code or even in the file system as well. And one of the differentiators, we will be predominantly talking about Logic Apps Standard here today, but it is about Logic Apps Standard, and what's different about it is that it is what we call single tenancy. And this provides you with dedicated compute, dedicated storage, networking, and you have the ability to go ahead and scale. So you can set your scaling parameters and scale your infrastructure out, and scale it up as needed, but really giving you that control that you may want as an enterprise in order to manage your automations or your integrations. Now, much like most of products in Microsoft, we've been adding agentic capabilities to our offering. We started back in 2024, and we've continued to make significant investments in 2025, and we'll continue to do so here in 2026. All right, so just a little bit more background on the SKUs. So Logic Apps Consumption, as I mentioned, this is kind of the relative to Cloud Flows, is a multi-tenant platform. So it is one of those things where Microsoft manages compute for the platform. You go ahead, you build your workflows, you use the connectors. We've got 1,400 plus managed connectors. Many of those are shared with the Power Platform. And one difference would be is that you actually see your resources deployed in your customer managed tenant. So, today if you go to Power Automate, you don't see your cloud flows in Azure. If you go to your same Azure tenant, you're not going to see them there because they live in a Microsoft managed tenant and subscription. Here, you would go see your Logic apps in your Azure tenant, your Azure subscription. That offers you some additional capabilities like managed identity, because that is all secured inside of your tenant, not a centralized tenant. Now, if we think about Logic App Standard, this is, as I mentioned before, a single tenant platform. You still get access to those same 1,400 plus managed connectors, but then what we offer is around 50. I haven't recently calculated because it's changing all the time, but there's around 50 built-in connectors. Now, what's interesting about these connectors is that they run inside of your compute. So you have dedicated compute, dedicated storage, dedicated network, and this is going to provide some opportunities. So for example, maybe you have high volume messaging, let's say Service Bus or even HTTP. You actually would run these as built-in connectors. They run in your compute, and what will happen there is the throttling won't be imposed on you. Right? When we talk about managed connectors, if it's a multi-tenant service, we have to build in these protection mechanisms so that we don't have noisy neighbors that sort of degrade the performance of other customers. With your instance being a Logic App Standard, it's your resources, and so we give you much more room to go ahead and execute your workloads, because you can scale those workloads as you need more, and you will naturally pay for those as you need them. When you don't need them, you scale back in and you don't get charged for them. And then we also can take advantage of other opportunities by using this architecture. One would be network, right? So we allow you to connect to virtual networks. We also allow you to expose your Logic app as a private endpoint. So if you truly do need to have like internal network traffic, you can go ahead and do that using Logic App Standard. The other thing that is offered, because these are all Azure resources, is managed identity. Both system and user identities is available so that you can go ahead and connect to your other Azure resources using the security paradigm, not having to worry about security keys, usernames, passwords, etc. And then the other thing that we do offer, because this is your compute, is that we offer local code functions. Now, these are technically Azure functions because we do sit on top of Azure functions from a runtime perspective. And so what we do support is the functions programming model that allows you to author code functions and have them deployed inside of Logic apps. So you can naturally go ahead and deploy Azure functions and call them through an HTTP endpoint. But the challenge there is that now that's another service you pay for. It's another service you have to secure. It's another deployment that you have to manage as well. When you've got sort of use cases where that logic is really sort of close, needs to be really close to your workflows, then there's this opportunity to plug in these local functions, deploy it with your Logic app. You don't have another endpoint. You don't have another security surface. You don't have another license or billing, bill that you have to take care of. And, that's all part of your Logic App Standard. Now, we've also introduced Logic Apps Hybrid, probably, I guess, 6 months ago, went into GA, or 8 months ago. And this is for customers that want to manage their own infrastructure. And what I mean by that is you can have your own Kubernetes cluster that is connected with Arc. And this can be running in Azure or in your own local data center or private cloud, whatever. And you can go ahead and deploy your Logic apps there. Now, this is what we call semi-connected, because you do need to have that Arc component, and that is going to allow you to connect to Azure. And so what this means is you can go in the Azure portal, you can see the designer there, you can use the designer, and what will happen is that when the runtime executes, that's running on your infrastructure, which could be on premises. All of the storage, all of the telemetry, the run history, that is actually on your SQL Server database, which would also be local as well. So you can run these kind of with, Azure could disconnect and you would still be running all these transactions. All your data would be there. You would then sort of reconnect to Azure, reconnect to Arc, and you go to the Azure portal and you'll see all of your transactions show up. This is also highly scalable because it's based on containers. We're using Kata scalers to help manage those containers. And customers are generally quite interested in this for some industry use cases. Maybe it's like healthcare or manufacturing, right, where you want those systems to have a little bit more resiliency to sort of internet connectivity issues. And then also in some certain circumstances, having data sovereignty, it helps in that area as well. All right, so these are our designers. So these should look relatively familiar if you've used Power Automate before. This is the Azure portal, right? This is our sort of newest version of our designer itself, which is currently in preview. We've introduced draft mode and then the ability to publish, which is kind of interesting. So you can actually make changes without disrupting what's actively there. Once you're really happy, then go publish it. So that's a relatively new feature. And then what we see here on the right-hand side is Visual Studio Code, right? So we've got an extension in VS Code, and you would go ahead and create workflows, connect to Azure Connections, and run it locally, debug locally. You can see the file system view here. These are all of the underlying files that support your solution as well. And then here's just a view of the connectors itself. So as I mentioned, we've got the Azure Managed. So these would be your connectors like, say, Microsoft Teams and Office 365, email, and say Salesforce and ServiceNow, and those types of SaaS type connectors would show up there. And then you can see the built-in. And these would be available only to standard and hybrid. One thing you'll notice here is these were typically connectors built for high volume processing. So, Service Bus, Event Hubs, Confluent Kafka, Event Grid, even HTTP, file system operations. These are all built in, just sort of giving you more scalability, more throughput, and sort of makes sense that those would run inside of local compute. All right, so let's talk a little bit about agentic capabilities. And so something that we introduced, this is now in GA, generally available. It was, I guess, a build we first announced this, and it's called Agent Loop. And this allows you to build agentic workflows or agentic business processes where you can go ahead and have an agent running, in the middle of your workflow. So it allows you to have like those deterministic steps when you need deterministic steps, and then it allows you to have agentic steps when you want agentic steps. And so how this works is, here this is an autonomous use case where we've got a Dataverse trigger that's just waiting for an event. And then we have an action, and the action is actually called Agent Loop. It kind of feels like a connector in some ways. And you can go ahead and connect to an Azure OpenAI model, right? So here I'm connecting to GPT-5, and I can go ahead and provide a prompt. Now, once I've got my prompt in place, I can go ahead and assign tools, right? So I can create these tools. Tools can be connectors. They can be workflows. They could be custom code. They could be other APIs. And we basically will give a tool a description, and then the model and the agent will work together to define or understand what is the right tool that needs to be called, and in what sequence does it need to actually be called as well. And so this becomes very powerful as people want to go ahead and build an agentic experience, within their Logic app itself. So I felt like there's no better way to kind of describe this than to show it to you. And so this is the example we're going to go ahead and see. And the use case is related to a wealth manager. So this is someone that would, say, work with customers on retirement planning and savings planning, and is, often related to like buying stock or funds, ETFs or, bonds, to help people save for their retirement. And so naturally, there's a lot of moving parts to those types of conversations where you might have a wealth manager, in this case, Tom, who has a customer named Jordan, and he wants to meet with his wealth manager, and Tom needs to sort of make sure he's prepared. And so he's going to go ahead and use, in this case, a conversational agent to orchestrate a business process that allows him to get ready to sort of have a productive meeting with Jordan. And so we're going to see a series of different tools that are available here to the agent. And then we're also going to connect to a model, and we're going to connect to knowledge. In this case, it's going to be a Google web search that's going to help us, within this process as well. So I'm going to let this video play, and the audio should be enabled. So if it's not playing, do let me know. But we'll go ahead and we'll run this end to end, and then if there's any questions, would be happy to take them at that time. All right, so let's start in the Logic Apps Designer. Now here I've gone ahead and created a workflow, and this workflow is going to support a conversational agent. So what we can do is we can head over to the workflows area. We can click on create. We've got templates, plus we've got just the create new experience. And then here we can kind of choose, do we want to have an autonomous agent, a conversational agent, a stateful deterministic workflow, or a stateless deterministic workflow? And I went ahead and selected the conversational one. So let's just exit out here, and then let's open up our sort of solution that's already been built. All right, so let's take a closer look, and then we'll run this. So it starts off, we've got an A2A trigger, and this supports the A2A protocol naturally. And this allows you to have a conversational agent, but this also opens the door for other agent-to-agent solutions as well, where you want to leverage that protocol. From there, we've got our agent loop action. And so this kind of looks and feels a little bit like a connector, but what's interesting is that behind the scenes there's a whole lot more. So this allows us to go ahead and create a connection to a large language model. Now, in this case, I've got a lot of different models that are available to me, and these would be Azure OpenAI models. And I've just chosen GPT-4.1. Just it meets my needs and is pretty quick. And then what we have the opportunity to provide is instructions for agents. So this would basically be our system prompt, and we're able to go ahead and describe what we want this agent to go ahead and do. And so what we're saying is that at the beginning of every interaction, retrieve and review the standard operating procedures from the business process tool, and then do not process any client or wealth manager requests before confirming that the standard operating procedures have been obtained. Then use the SOP to validate actions during the session. And if the SOP has not been retrieved, pause further steps until you do it. And then just reinforcing the importance of the SOP and making sure that that actually is used. And so that's how we can go ahead and connect to our large language model and provide instructions. Now, back to that standard operating procedures, we do have a tool that will go ahead and get the details for us. And so here, this tool shows up over here. We have a Word document that is actually shown inside of SharePoint, or I guess hosted inside of SharePoint, and we're going to go retrieve it. And then what we're going to do is use a parse a document action. So this is one of our AI operations that actually helps you go ahead and basically extract kind of the key information. If we think about a Word document, there's a whole bunch of like binary and rich metadata that we don't need. We just want to focus more on the content. So that's what it's going to allow us to do. Now, I've opened up this Word document just to give you a sense of what's included in here, right? So this is kind of an important concept, and I really sort of like to emphasize this, is that if you think about what you're building, it is aligned to some sort of business process. So there's some sort of business process that you're trying to enhance or automate or enable, and you want to make sure that that business process is followed. And so here we've just outlined the business process in natural language, what we expect this solution to go do. So we want to support a wealth manager and how they manage customer interactions. And so as a result, we're saying that there could be actions, and these kind of translate to tools in many ways, to go ahead and check a calendar for availability, book a meeting, access a customer portfolio and calculate their net worth, looking for any recent news for a particular stock symbol, building a pre-meeting briefing document with some instructions, both functional and non-functional as well, calculating their portfolio, accessing previous meeting notes, accessing customer demographic information, retrieving the last meeting transcript, summarizing a meeting transcript. So these are all operations that we want to go ahead and enable. And so what that does is that translates to tools here. So if we go from right to left, we can go ahead and retrieve previous meeting notes from Salesforce. We can go ahead and create a Salesforce opportunity with meeting notes. We can get previous meeting transcripts. This is going to call a child workflow, which we'll go call a graph API. We can go generate a Word document, that pre-briefing document, and go ahead and send that out and send a link to our wealth manager with the document. We can go get news. In this case, we're querying the Google search API, and we're going to parse news and make that available. We're going to get customer portfolio information. We'll get customer details, both account and contact information. We'll book a meeting with Teams. We'll get the wealth manager's email address, and we'll also go ahead and get find meeting times. Now, one thing just to highlight here is you might be asking, okay, well, great, what account do these actions run underneath? And we have introduced a concept called on behalf of, which allows specific actions to run under the context of the logged in user that's using the agent, that is. And so this is an example of one that we've enabled this for. If we add a connection, you'll see that there's this create as per user connection. And so this will then go ahead, when this is enabled, will prompt the user for consent to go ahead and use their credentials, so that when we're looking to find meeting times, it's in my chat session. I could have a colleague that comes and uses this as well, and it would run in their session. So this is a pretty big deal and pretty important capability to go ahead and unlock. So with that said, let's now go ahead and run this. We can click on our chat link here, and that will open up a chat surface. And what we'll want to do here is just click on a new chat. Now I'm just going to start with something simple and just say, hi, like, what can you help me with? And this is where that standard operating procedures document will come into place, where it's going to be able to say, hey, these are all of the functions that I can go ahead and help you with. Okay, so here it's streamed a response back. And so it's going to outline things that we can do, like checking calendar availability, accessing client portfolio info, etc. Now, just to kind of reinforce the importance of having kind of the business process mapped out, I'm just going to ask, hey, can you go ahead and get me a coffee? And it's saying, no, sorry, I can't do that because that's not part of our standard operating procedures. So once again, we're enforcing a business process through knowledge. Now, in this case, it's knowledge as a tool, but it's knowledge nonetheless. Now let's talk about some more relevant use cases. So let's go ahead and get customer details and portfolio information for one of our customers, Jordan Avery. Now, what's going to happen here is that there's going to be multiple tools that are called simultaneously, right? So we actually went ahead and called and we were able to get this information from Salesforce. Now, for some reason, it didn't go ahead and grab the portfolio, but let's just ask for that again. All right, so that looks a little bit better. And here, what we can see is that this person has a variety of different, equities that they do own. And obviously, this is also fictional, but it's coming from an actual table itself. So we've got Microsoft, Meta, AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, and we can see their total portfolio value, the sort of basically the profit loss statement. And now we're being asked, hey, is there any, recent news on these holdings? So it feels like NVIDIA always has something going on. So let's go ahead and see if there's any news for NVIDIA. So let's just go ahead and send that out. All right, so this is something where we've got some links. We could go ahead and check out those links, and that's of interest. But let's kind of roll the dice here a little bit, try to make it a little more interesting. And then let's say any news from CES. So CES is the big consumer electronics show that's happening in Las Vegas recently. And, so this is something where looks like they made headlines about AI, advanced graphics technology, new GPUs, advancements in automotive AI. Actually, they released an interesting framework for autonomous AI vehicles. So that's kind of interesting. Where I was able to go ahead and retrieve that in real time. Now, we want to go ahead and talk to Jordan. Jordan's interested in having a meeting, and naturally, we want to go into that being prepared. And so he might be asking about NVIDIA and what's going on with it. Like, is it still something that he should still be a part of? And so let's go ahead and ask for a pre-meeting briefing document that includes this information and any other recommendations for Jordan as well. Now, so this is running in the background. It's basically going to summarize this information. It then went ahead and emailed our wealth manager with this information in a Word document. So let's flip over to email and see if we can find this. All right, so in the email, we can see that we've got a pre-meeting briefing document available. So let's go ahead and let's open this. All right, so it's gone ahead and opened it. It's got a bunch of his demographic information, his holdings, and we've got the NVIDIA news update from CES. So, these are some steps it's suggesting that I, as a wealth manager, can go ahead and include or consider when meeting with Jordan Avery. So the next question is, okay, let's go ahead and set up a time with Jordan so we can go ahead and go over this information. So I will go ahead and see, hey, what does my schedule look like on January 9th? And so here it's got some openings in my calendar. And so that's great. So we can now go ahead and say, let's go with 8:30 a.m. And now that should go ahead and book that meeting in the calendar. Book with Jordan. And once again, it's going to go leverage that information from Salesforce about Jordan's contact information, including his email address. So here we've got a meeting that has been booked. Let's just go ahead and double check on that. All right, didn't want to show my entire calendar, but here we go. We can see that we've got that meeting that's booked, including the information that we should focus on. So that's great. All right, so you can imagine we've had a meeting with Jordan, and this meeting's gone well, and we naturally want to go ahead and get the summary of this particular meeting. Now, obviously, this meeting is fictional, but the idea we can go ahead and retrieve meeting transcripts from the Graph API. So what I've got is a meeting that's previously took place where I recorded a conversation and we were able to basically have that transcript. So that's what's going to be retrieved here. So it's going to go ahead and get the latest transcript from that meeting, and you can kind of see in the Teams format kind of all of the exchanges that were going back and forth. So that's great, but we want this for long-term usage. So if there was any sort of audit or any discrepancies in the future, we want to make sure that this is available to us. We also want to make sure that the next time we talk to Jordan, we can also review our notes from this interaction and make sure like that I've gone ahead and followed up on any sort of commitments that I may have made. So let's just go ahead and update Salesforce with this information. And so this will go call that Salesforce tool, and it should create a new opportunity for us. So, okay, so let's go ahead and head over to Salesforce. So let's refresh. So this is the account for Jordan Avery. And then we should also have a contact that's linked to it. So we can see that's his email address and etc. And then we've got the notes, right? So here we did a portfolio review with NVIDIA and the CES update discussion. And basically we've got the meeting transcripts and summary that is available here as well. And we could then go ahead and review this in the future and to basically go ahead and be able to sort of have a better conversation with him in the future itself. So I guess one more thing just to talk about is obviously we've talked a little bit about run history, or we will going to talk a little bit about run history. This is another sort of example of kind of the importance of that traceability. So if we go into the run history, what we can see is a replay of that entire conversation. And we could see all of the tools being called and all of the inputs, outputs that we would go ahead and expect to see. Certainly, if you're familiar with Power Automate, this will be a familiar experience. So we can see full traceability, inputs, outputs, what the user said, what the agent responded back with, and we've got a very complete picture. We also have another view of this. This is the task timeline. This is kind of why we call it agent loop, is because it is this loop in the sense that we are looping and doing multiple turns. So for each of these tasks, you can kind of think of that as a turn, and we can see exactly what were the tools that were called for that specific turn, and basically get more information about them as needed. All right, so that was a quick look into agent loop. I know we're focused here on MCP servers, but I just thought that was something that would be of interest to this group. Now, what we're going to be building with MCP servers can also work with this agent loop. Here we've got specific tools that are being called in connectors, but we can also add MCP servers to that component as well. Once again, if there's any questions, do feel free to go ahead and log them, and happy to go through those as we sort of move through the presentation as well. All right, so just some other agentic capabilities inside of Logic Apps, just to kind of complete this chapter before we move on. So we do offer a Python code interpreter. This is actually pretty cool. It does allow you to provide a data set or retrieve a data set, either or. Then the ability to provide a prompt, instructions on what you want the code to actually go do. And then what it'll do is dynamically write that code and surface the results. So pretty cool if you had, say, a spreadsheet or something like that, and you wanted to analyze it and use AI to go ahead and construct some code that would go execute and allow you to do that. That's exactly what you can go ahead and do. The other piece here is RAG. So both ingestion and retrieval. There's still a place for that, and it actually kind of works complementary to what I had showed with Agent Loop, where you might have a process where you are continuing to ingest data, like maybe you've got document updates, or you've got transactional data that you want to continue to ingest to perhaps like Azure AI Search, and then you want to be able to go ahead and retrieve that information. You can do that retrieval inside of Agent Loop. Basically, knowledge is a tool, kind of similar to what I showed you with SharePoint, and actually leverage that vector database when trying to go ahead and discover patterns. We also offer some AI operations. You saw one of those around parse a document. And then there's also, when we think about ingestion, chunking is another sort of built-in operation. We do provide document intelligence. So this is in the form of a connector, and would be useful when you wanted to, say, parse a PDF document. So you might have an inbound process where you get an invoice as an attachment, and it's one of those things where you can go ahead and scrape that content from the PDF and then be able to go ahead and populate downstream systems by using connectors and things like that. We also have a lot of Microsoft Foundry integrations. We're going to see some of those here today. One that we won't see today, but it is available. Actually, it'll be in my session on not this Friday, but the next Friday. And that's we have a connector. So there's an agent service connector for Foundry. So inside of a Logic Apps workflow, we can actually go ahead and call an agent that is hosted and running inside of Foundry. We'll also see the tool catalog here today as well. And then last but not least is MCP servers. And that's really what we're here to talk about. So we'll get right into the MCP server side of things here. All right. So what is Model Context Protocol? So it is an open protocol that enables seamless integration between large language model applications or agents and tools and data. And so with Logic Apps having more than 1,400 different connectors, this does allow an organization to connect to a variety of different APIs, file systems, databases, models, and much more. And so by using Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services, in this case, Azure API Center, customers can create composable architectures and quickly enable MCP tools that can be discovered and consumed. And hopefully this really shines through with the demos, because it is truly a dynamic experience that is allows you to move quite quickly. Now, one of the earlier challenges with Model Context Protocol, and maybe it kind of still exists in some ways today, is security and a consistent security scheme. And so with this in mind, we've started with securities like from the beginning. And we've enabled Entra ID and what's known as Easy Auth inside of Azure to simplify the securing of MCP servers and make it consistent as well. So this really does allow you to use your Entra ID principles to be authenticated when using these MCP servers. And so yeah, we do support multiple experiences for building these MCP servers, and we're certainly going to go ahead and explore those here today. All right, so what would be some of the benefits of using an MCP server? Like in that example we saw in Agent Loop, we saw connectors. Even if you go into Copilot Studio, we'll see later on, it's the same sort of concept where, hey, I can just use a connector. So why do I care about MCP servers? And so I think it really comes down to, the more of the enterprise lens that you're sort of looking through, and sort of what are the benefits when you sort of think about doing this at scale. If you're building a single POC, maybe you don't need to use MCP servers if you've got sort of you're using Agent Loop or Copilot Studio or even Foundry. But when you start thinking about how to do this across organizations, I think this is where it becomes very much important. So think about unifying your enterprise connectivity, providing standard pathways to all your key business data, especially if we're thinking about like system of record platforms like, say, SAP or your CRMs, where you don't want people to continually to reinvent that wheel. And it's one of those things where you can build out the MCP server, expose the functionality that you want to expose, don't expose the functionality you don't want to expose, and then avoid duplication so that people aren't rebuilding those things, right? So build it once and then go ahead and reuse it many times. The other thing to think about is, leveraging your existing investments. So you may already have APIs, connectors, or even workflows that connect to these key business systems. And you might want to go ahead and expose those components to your agent. And I think a workflow is a great example of it. We often, run into scenarios where the workflow is not as simple as just calling a single action, right? Sometimes there's lookups that need to take place before you can go ahead and write data, right? And so that might be an example of where you want to sort of build an enrichment workflow, and you might want to use that as opposed to having like these little micro sort of MCP tools as well. And certainly as you get into more complex use cases, I'd say more of these exist. And I would also argue that today, you might have built like deterministic workflows that have a bunch of this logic, and you might want to expose those to your agents, but you don't want to break them all apart either and start over. So that might be a scenario where, hey, I've got an existing workflow, I just want to use it. And so that might be another reason to sort of leverage an MCP server. So let's talk about Logic App's MCP server deployment models. And so there's currently 3 that exist today. And we'll see all of them today, so no worries there. But we'll start with API Center, and this provides an experience for building and discovering MCP servers within an organization. Then we'll see the Microsoft Foundry Tools Catalog, and this allows you to go ahead and browse for a specific connector or operation, and then be able to dynamically build an MCP server around it, starting inside of Foundry. And then we'll show you the Logic App's native experience where like you might already have a bunch of workflows, and how can I just go ahead and enable MCP on top of those existing workflows? And we'll certainly show that as well. So let's start with API Center. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with API Center, it is an enterprise catalog for APIs and MCP servers. Now, I would say there's 2 personas that are typically involved with API Center. The first one being kind of your administrative lens, where you've got someone or people that are going to sort of manage your APIs for the organization, and you want to make sure that those are discoverable, and so everyone can go ahead and see them, and that you have some oversight in terms of, hey, what exists, what are they doing, how are they built, what are the security protocols being used, what are the policies being used, and you can sort of manage it from an enterprise layer. Then there's also this notion of like discoverability. So as a developer, where can I go look to see what exists in our enterprise? So if there's an API that can go ahead and create a purchase order, why would I go rewrite one if there's one that I can already go ahead and use? And so that's that particular lens. And so what has been introduced, this is as recent as this summer, is customers can dynamically create MCP servers based upon Logic App connectors. And it kind of takes place through this registration button, where you then have the ability to go ahead and search for one of those 1,400 Azure managed connectors, and then provide some level of configuration for it. And you will see why this is important. Sometimes people ask, well, hey, why don't you just take all of the connectors and just like make them MCP servers? And I think for those of you that have used Power Automate and use these connectors, you probably would run into situations quite quickly where this becomes problematic. So think about Dataverse, think about SharePoint, think about ServiceNow, think about Salesforce. These are all like entity-driven solutions or table-driven solutions, where you could have a very generic operation like create record. But then there's a decision that has to be made. Well, create record of what? Like, am I creating an incident? Am I creating a contact? Am I creating an account? Right? So these are things that you generally want to pre-wire and then choose what are the related inputs that you want to go collect. Because we know if you go into Dataverse, there can be entities that have tens or maybe even 100 different columns or attributes that you want to go that can be populated. You probably don't want to expose all of that to your agent, right? So you want some control. And I think that's what we allow you to do, is to dynamically build that experience that makes plugging this MCP tool into an agent to be quite successful, because you won't run into a whole lot of ambiguity if you've got sort of field clashes or tool name clashes and things like that. And once again, we will enable easy auth so that we've got security applied from the get-go. And so just a little bit more info about API Center. So it is that central hub. It is a catalog. You can stop your API sprawl, get a single source of truth for all of your different types of APIs, whether it's REST, GraphQL, WebSocket, SOAP, MCP. These don't necessarily have to be Microsoft APIs. These could also be the third-party APIs as well. And just to really allows an organization to raise the bar on quality and compliance while enforcing design standards. And you might be wondering, okay, well, hey, is this going to cost a lot of money? There's kind of two modes here. There's two SKUs. There's a free SKU and there's a paid SKU. Now, what I'm going to show you today is the free SKU, and it's fully functional. It's not a trial. There is a limit of up to 200 different APIs that can be registered. So that's your constraint. But that gives you a lot of runway to see if this is a tool that will be quite useful for you or not. So that's, I think, a great start. So that's something to sort of keep in mind. All right, so here I've got a sort of series of short video clips that we'll go through, but these are the steps that we'll go ahead and provide in order to build an MCP server with API Center. So we'll create an API Center instance. We'll configure the API portal and assign API Center permissions. Now, this is really important from that discoverability perspective. And then we'll go ahead and build our MCP server. And this is the MCP server. It's going to be based on Salesforce. And then we'll test our MCP server using VS Code. Now, what we're going to build here is ultimately what we're going to use from Copilot Studio. So this is kind of gives you a view in terms of the work that you would kind of do beforehand. And then we'll show you later, when you're in Copilot Studio, how do you leverage the stuff that's being built here. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll hit play. These are very short, so these will not take too long at all. Okay, so here we're going to go ahead and search for API Center. Then we'll go ahead and click on create. We will select our resource group. We'll provide a name. We'll select the appropriate region. And then here, we're definitely going to want to make sure that we choose the free monthly tier. So this will entitle you to up to 200 different APIs and MCP servers without having to sort of pay for any API Center services. So make sure you select free. We'll just go ahead and review and then create. Okay, we'll click on the create button. This should just take a few moments. Okay, our deployment's complete. We can go ahead and navigate to our resource, and here we will find API Center. All right, so that's step one. So here we're going to go ahead and search for API Center. Now what we'll do is configure the API portal and assign some permissions. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to configure the API Center portal, and we can do so by clicking on Settings underneath API Center Portal Preview. So here what we're going to go ahead and do is click on Start Setup, and we will do the quick setup. We will let Azure Portal take care of all of this, and this will be the simplest way forward. Okay, so we've got our settings established for API Center. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat. So we can click on this View API Center Portal, which is cool. The problem is, even if we go ahead and try to sign in here, we're not going to see anything. And the reason for this is that there's some permissions that we do need to establish for any user that wants to access the API portal. Now, in the docs, here we can see that we need to assign API Center data reader role to people that want to use this particular experience. So I need to go ahead and do that for my user. So I'll head over to the access and identity management control. Now I do have access to do this in this particular tenant. You may need to ask someone to go ahead and do this for you. But here's the Azure API Center data reader. Let's go ahead and select that. Let's select the member. Now I'm going to pause the recording here for a sec. All right, so I've selected my account, and we will just go ahead and review and assign. So even though I do have elevated privileges in this subscription, I still have to explicitly have access to that particular role. Otherwise, I still can't access the portal. But let's come back here. And if I refresh, I'll now see this. So this is something that is available just out of the box as a sample, the Swagger Pet Store. So if you can see this, then you know you're in good shape. Now, what's the purpose of this API portal? This is once we've gone through the wizard, we will actually go ahead and see our MCP server show up here. And so we will come back to this portal because we will want to grab the URL from this particular experience so that we can go ahead and use it in other agent experiences. Okay, so that's kind of the prerequisites. All right, so now what we want to now just a little bit more info about sort of the scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to build an MCP server that helps with sales management. So there's 4 different operations or MCP tools that we're going to enable. So we're going to allow you to create a contact in Salesforce, get accounts, get opportunities, and then update an opportunity itself. And so what's going to happen is we're going to choose the connector actions that sort of map to these functions. And then under the hood, inside of the Logic app, we're going to have a workflow for each of these different tools. And this is why Logic App Standard is required, and actually why Logic App Standard makes a lot of sense. Logic App Standard has this concept of an app, right? Where we can have one application with many different workflows. If we think about Logic App's consumption, there's this like mapping of like one Logic app is one workflow. And so there's no sort of concept of bundling, which is what we get with Logic App Standard. So that's going to make a little bit more sense here. So we'll go ahead, and this is kind of the fun part, where first we'll create a logic app standard so you can see what that process looks like. And then we'll actually go through the wizard of building the MCP server itself. In order to use our MCP server, we do need a logic app. Since I don't have one in the subscription, I'm going to go ahead and create one. So let's just go ahead and go through that process right now. Now, in this case, we do want to use workflow service plan. We don't want to use multi-tenant consumption. This won't work. We do want to use the workflow service plan. Then we need to provide some information here. All right, so I've got the name of my logic app here. I'm going to go ahead and create a Windows plan, an service plan, and we're going to use just the smallest one. This gives us dedicated compute, dedicated memory, and we don't need redundancy for this particular use case. So I'm just going to accept the defaults and then jump to the creation step. Okay, everything's been validated. We are ready to go ahead and deploy. Okay, so the resource is being created. Let's just go ahead and click into it. Now, what we'll see here is that we've got no workflows that have been created, and that's what we would expect. So let's head over back to API Center. So we're in API Center. Let's click on the register button, and now we should have our logic app that is here. Now, this is pretty important. We do want to provide an MCP server name that is going to make sense for us, because we will leverage this later on when we go ahead and call it. And also, you just in general want descriptive names. It's just as a good practice. All right, so I've provided a name, I've provided a description. Now what we need to do is add a connector. So this is where we're going to browse and see that 1400 connector library that are all what we call Azure managed connectors. Here I'm going to go ahead and select Salesforce, and we will then go ahead and select into this. Now, these are all of the actions that we want to go ahead and obtain or use. So I want to create a record. So we're going to create a contact. See what else here. We want to get account records. So that is of interest to us. We also want to go ahead and get opportunities from Salesforce, and we want to go ahead and update a record as well. So we're going to select those. And then next, we need to go ahead and create a connection. So I'm going to sign in with my Salesforce credentials here, and then we will have a connection created inside of our logic app. Okay, so this is where I'm logging into Salesforce, and after that, we will have a connection established for us. Okay, our connection is ready. Now, we're not quite done. We do need to provide some additional configuration. And this is really important. And it's also a reason why you don't just have connectors exposed as MCP servers. Sometimes you might see that, and it's okay for some simpler things like sending emails or posting a message on Teams or something like that. But in this case, we've got a very generic operation here called create record. Now, the question is create record of what? So this is where we need to go ahead and to provide an object type. Here, we want to basically connect to Salesforce, and we can see all of the different entities that are available. So in this case, we want to have a contact as our entity type. The next thing we want to do is have information that we pass to this particular MCP server. So we go ahead and define that. Now, we've got last name as a mandatory value here, and now we can select other optional values like email, first name, and we'll go with the mailing city. And then the other thing, we want to link it to an account, so we'll also select that as well. Now, so now we've got, these are the 5 different inputs that we're expecting our model to go ahead and pass in. There's one other thing we should always do. This is going to use the default description that comes from the connector metadata. We should update this so that this is more relevant. In this case, we're going to say this tool will create a contact inside of Salesforce. And this becomes really important because when we go ahead and provide instructions to an agent and the LLM, it needs to know what to go do. When we just have create record and a very generic description, it's not going to know what it needs to go ahead and perform. So we'll save changes here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and update these other options as well. And I'll pause the recording just so that you don't have to see all of that. Okay, so I've updated all of those. Now we're going to go ahead and click on register. Now we can see here we've got tools that are being created, and then we should also see a registration process taking place. Okay, so we see green lights all around, which is great news. Yeah, so let's go ahead and just quickly explore here. So first off, let's go to the Logic app. Remember, we had an empty workflow folder. So now we've got all of these different workflows, all of these MCP tools that we previously had gone ahead and configured. Now, this is one of the value adds of using that wizard, is that it went ahead and created some workflows and wired them up for us automatically so that we didn't have to do it. Even though these are simple workflows, it still takes time. Some of this is a little bit tedious. Remember those input parameters on the create? So last name, account ID, etc. It did all of that wiring up for us. So it went ahead and generated a schema for our request, plus it has some additional metadata associated with it. So once again, when our agent connects to this MCP server, it will go ahead and understand what are the inputs that are required. The other thing that happens is that those inbound parameters are automatically mapped to our Salesforce action here, and we don't have to wire up any of that. A best practice as well on the response, we're just going to return the entire body. We could update this if we wanted to, but the configure run after is pretty important, where we always want to go ahead and provide a response if it's been successful or timed out or has failed. So even if we get an error message for some reason, we should communicate that back to the model so that it can actually go ahead and try to retry the execution itself. So that's the Logic app configuration. Now, one other thing that's worth exploring, because we're going to need this information a little bit later when we need to connect from Copilot Studio, and that's authentication. So if we've wired up what's called the easy auth authentication in this Logic app already, we've created an app registration and called this MCP Logic MCP Server LA. And we've done all of this pre-configuration so that that will use OAuth by default. And so we'll see this a little bit later in our workshop. In order to use our... All right, so at this point, we've got our MCP server created. And always, obviously, as a developer, you're going to want to go ahead and test this. And so one tool that you can use to test this is VS Code. I find it's a great tool for just doing some initial testing. And then, once this is, working and you're happy with things, then you can kind of give the endpoint to someone else to plug it into their agent as well. So that's what we're going to see right now. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's test our MCP server. Now, one thing that we will do is we'll head back to our API portal, click on settings, click on view API portal. Then we'll need to log in. So now we can see that we've got our MCP server. So this is great. We can go ahead and click on it. And if we scroll down, we will see a copy link, copy URL for our MCP server. So let's click on that value. And we now need to go test this. Now, we will get to Copilot Studio, but it's always kind of a good idea in my mind is to test your MCP server before you start sharing it with others. And one way you can go do this is with VS Code. So let's head over to VS Code, and we'll click on View Command Palette, MCP Server, Add MCP. And then we'll use HTTP, and then here's that URL that we got from the API portal. And then here we'll call this MCP, just because I have a few other Salesforce MCP servers. And here we will make this globally available. Now, So this is what's happened is we've got our MCP server set up here. Now it's asking me to go ahead and authenticate. So this is good because we set up OAuth. And so now it's going to prompt me for my corporate credentials in order to go ahead and authenticate and use this. Also notice we don't have any API keys or nothing here because we are using OAuth. And so we're doing this in a very secure manner. Now, one thing, I've paused while I've logged in, but one thing you'll see here is there's also this consent, right, where we're being asked for permissions to go ahead and connect to this MCP server. So I thought that would be interesting to show as well. Okay, so what we'll do here is let's go ahead and start this MCP server, and that we do see that it is running. So that's a good sign. And then also notice that there's 4 tools that have been discovered. So if you haven't used VS Code before in GitHub Copilot, this is kind of interesting. You want to make sure you're in agent mode because there's a few different modes there. Model is kind of up to you. Here we'll just use GPT-5, but we could use the other models that are available. But this tools is interesting. So let's just go in here and just search for Salesforce, and we'll see that we've got the MCP workshop here. So we've got our 4 tools. Now, I don't want to sort of run into like ambiguous calls. So let's just deselect these other ones that are enabled because we don't want any sort of interference. Now, so what I'll do now is I'll just walk up to this agent and just say hi. And we won't go through all of the MCP tools because once again, we'll get to that once we go ahead and connect from Copilot Studio, and we'll kind of build out a full agent. But this will just at least do an initial kind of smoke test against the MCP server. Okay, so I'm just going to say get account for Contoso construction. And so our agent should be smart enough to say, hey, I've got this MCP tools, MCP server that offers tools and accounts to go ahead and retrieve. So it should be able to go ahead and grab this information for us. Okay, so it's basically about to call our MCP server. And you could see just some information, so we know it's on the right path, right? So we're in this particular MCP server, which is ours. This is the name of that workflow tool that will get us the account information. Now, this is where we typically go ahead and see any sort of inputs that need to be provided. Here, there's just some additional preamble that they're displaying here, but not overly too relevant. But we'll click the allow button, and now we should go ahead and call that MCP server. And sure enough, it's gone ahead and retrieved that account information. Now, this is, I think, one of the value props for using Logic Apps is this notion of telemetry, right? And we can see exactly what just happened. So we're now back in the Logic app. We see the workflows, and we want to click on the Get Account Records from Salesforce, and then we can click on Run History. So if you've used Power Automate before, this will be quite familiar for you. And here we could see exactly the request that was made, the response that was retrieved from Salesforce and returned back to our agent. So at least this point, we've done an initial test. We feel good that we've created a MCP server that we can go ahead and call in an authenticated manner and retrieve the information that we're interested in. All right, so that's kind of, okay, so let's go. Completes that chapter. Before I move on, is there any questions thus far? Oh, okay. So question, how can I consume an MCP server from a Logic app? So I do have a full video about this on my YouTube channel. But what you can do, let's just see. And for now, you need to make sure that you're not in the preview designer. I should be able to do this here, though. But inside of an agentic workflow here, when you go ahead and add an action, it needs to be inside of an agent loop itself. When you click on the plus sign, there should be add an MCP server preview. And so this is going to be pretty similar to what we're going to see in Copilot Studio, where there's going to be some of these that are like out of the box MCP servers. And then in this case, we would add a custom MCP server. We would choose our authentication. In this case, it would be OAuth. We would provide the information, and then we could go ahead and call it. We are working on some enhancements, I would say, that allows you to sort of just select it from a list, especially with it being a logic app. But for now, that's how you would go ahead and do so. So yeah, that's available today. I do have a complete walkthrough on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out. All right, was there any other questions? Otherwise, we'll get back. Okay, so we'll get back into it. We'll talk about Microsoft Foundry here. After we get through Foundry, which is probably maybe 15 minutes, we'll then take a short break and allow people to get a refill and whatnot. So we'll take a break in about 15 minutes. So let's talk a little bit about Microsoft Foundry. So Foundry, if you're not familiar with it, it is a strategic AI platform for Microsoft. It provides developers with a one-stop shop for building and managing agents. Now, agents aren't as useful without connectivity, right? MCP servers and MCP tools, add a tremendous amount of value to agents. And so this is one of those things where we've worked with the Foundry team on a better together experience where you can take advantage of those 1,400 plus connectors that exist in Logic Apps and basically build a MCP server, much like we just saw from API Center. So it does share a similar experience. Kind of there's a front end that's a little different, but kind of the back end is all the exact same. But we do wire this up so it's ready to be used for Foundry. So we kind of simplify some of the security aspects, I would say, as well. So here what we see is a screenshot of Foundry. We can see existing tools that exist that this developer has added to a particular project in Foundry. And from there, you can go ahead and search for different tools and then go ahead and go through the wizard to provision it. Now, Foundry also has some other MCP capabilities outside of Logic Apps as well, but really what they've done is unified all of those options in a single location. So the steps that we're going to follow are kind of similar to API Center. One of the differences is that we're not going to create an API Center instance. We're going to create a Foundry project. We'll then go ahead and access the tools catalog. We'll then build the MCP server, and then we'll go ahead and test it. Now, this time we're going to test it in Microsoft Foundry as opposed to VS Code. And just to sort of add some additional flavor here, we're going to connect to ServiceNow instead of Salesforce, just to show a little bit of a different use case. So here we'll walk through this experience now as well. Now, to get started with Microsoft Foundry, we do need to create an instance. So we'll head to the Azure portal, and this is where we can go ahead and create a resource. So this will just kind of follow our sort of traditional sort of steps where we need to select a subscription resource group, etc. All right, so I've just filled in my details, and I can also go ahead and provide a project name, a default project name. So we will just go ahead and enable that. Okay, our resource is available and is now complete. Now, we from there want to go to the Foundry portal, so we'll just go ahead and click on that. Now, something to be aware of is that as of Ignite, there's kind of two sort of modes with Foundry because they're actively making some enhancements there. So we've got this notion of the old Foundry and new Foundry. For the stuff that we want to be doing, we want to make sure that we're in new Foundry. So just click this toggle here, and then we should be able to search for our default project that we just had created, so MCP Workshop. So then we can go ahead and click on Let's Go. Now, some interesting information just available right off the bat. Like we do have a project endpoint, we have an API key. We won't be using that here, but sometimes you need that info, so that's available to you. Then you kind of want to look at these tabs at the top. So home, discover, build, operate, and docs. Now, the area that we're interested in here is going to be build. And this is where we can go ahead and do things like create an agent, and we can go ahead and establish tools. So we will come back to creating an agent. I think what we want to go ahead and start with is the tools conversation. So let's go ahead and click on tools, and then we can go ahead and connect a tool. Now, Foundry is interesting in the sense that there's a lot going on, right? So they've got a bunch of first-party and third-party integration around tools and some pre-configured options here. Like you can see Fabric, browser automation, that's that computer usage stuff. And then they've got SharePoint. Now, where we want to head over to is we want to head over to Catalog. And once again, there's going to be a lot of different options inside of here. We've got things that are related to Logic Apps. We have things that are not related to Logic App. For example, when you see things like MCP Local, that means like they've gone ahead and built some sort of integration with it. We also have situations where some vendors provide their own MCP servers. So Box would be one of them, and that just becomes available as part of this platform. So this is more than just Logic Apps. This can be much more. Now, what's also kind of interesting, we talked about API Center before, and we can actually plug into those registries here as well. So we might have our API Center instance that we want to connect Foundry to and can go ahead and do that. Now, what I had created before is in a different tenant, so we don't see that listed here, but that is an option. We could just also select on Logic App connectors, or just another way to go ahead and address this is to just search for the connector that you're interested in. Now, I'm going to go ahead and build some tools with ServiceNow. And so that's where we'll go ahead and select ServiceNow. And this is going to be that Logic App connector. Now, what is also interesting is, and this is where it's a little different than what we saw with API Center. API Center, we had an existing Logic App that was already available for us that we could go ahead and use. Here, to help customers get started, we offer a limited Logic Apps instance that you can use for Foundry. So here we can go ahead and create this. There's no cost for the compute and the memory, the storage for now. And there is still a sort of a small transaction for the connector usage. So that's kind of like a fraction of a penny every time you call it. So nothing too substantial. So here I'm going to call this MCP Workshop LA, and then on Foundry, just so I know it's Foundry. And we'll go ahead and create this resource. So this will take just a minute or two, so I'll pause the recording. All right, so our resource was automatically created, and we get redirected to this experience. Now, this should look familiar, and it is for good reason. This is a shared experience between the API Center stuff that you saw previously and now Microsoft Foundry. Now, because we selected our connector first, we know what operations we want to go ahead and provide here. So these would be the connector operations for ServiceNow if we wanted to build an ITSM tool. So let's go ahead. We want to be able to create an incident for sure. And then I think it probably makes sense to list records. So list incidents. So we'll also go ahead and select that as well. We could do update, but won't sort of go too deep here. Once again, we need to go ahead and create a connection. So I will go ahead and do that. So I've got this information in place. Okay, so our connection's there. We'll hit save. And now there's still things we want to go ahead and provide here. So we do need to provide an MCP server name. Because what is actually kind of interesting is that we can run this wizard multiple times and leverage the same Logic App, but have multiple MCP servers. And that becomes particularly useful when you have you want some isolation or separation between your MCP servers. So let's go ahead and populate this info. Okay, so I've provided an MCP server name and a description. Now we do want to go ahead and do some configuration here. So much like we saw with Salesforce, we want to make some updates. The first would be the description. Okay, so we want to update it so that it's specific to creating an IT incident, because remember, we've got to create record. This is a very generic operation because ServiceNow has hundreds of tables, it looks like, and we want to be very focused on dealing with incidents. And so that's why we want to pre-configure this so that we don't have a large language model that's doing a lot of guessing. That wouldn't end well. The other thing we want to do now is to select a few different properties that we want to include. So severity is always a good one. Short description is another one. Obviously, you can go ahead and add more as you see fit as well. These will be provided by the model. Now, even though this list record says configured, I like it. I think it's a good practice just to go ahead and do those updates here as well. And same thing with the model. Like if we don't, like right now, what's going to happen is the agent will try to guess what table we're interested in. Since we know that we want to focus on incidents, let's change this to be user provided and then just be more explicit about the fact that we want to return incidents. I think that's just a better way to go. Another thing that you may want to also do is, you could query. So you could provide the opportunity to query for a specific ticket number, or you might want to limit like the number of values that are returned, right? And so this is where you might want to just like limit your return set to maybe 15 items, because we may not want to use or abuse a whole bunch of tokens. Same thing with fields. If there's fields that are being returned that we're just not interested in, they're just going to burn up tokens, we can restrict that so that this is more optimized. Now let's go ahead. We're ready to register. And so we can go ahead and do that right now. Now, one tip is that if you run through this, you might get prompted for a pop-up block. So look for that icon here in this top right-hand corner, because you should be redirected back here. If you're not redirected back here, you probably have a pop-up block. And so you want to make sure that that is enabled, because we're now back inside of Foundry. We go to tools and we can see this information. So we've got those two tools that belong to this particular MCP server. We have an endpoint. And then what's happened here is the authentication's been a little different. Because this is starting from Foundry, what's happened is that there's been managed identity and security configuration taken place for you so that this particular project can go ahead and call that logic app without any additional security being required. So this will be a little bit different than what we see with Copilot Studio. Okay, so our MCP server is available. Now, what do we do with it, right? So we want to use an agent. And since we don't have any agents here, what we'll do is we'll create one. So we'll just call this MCP workshop, and we'll call it ITSM. All right, so now we get redirected over to the agent experience. So you can see here we're in agents, and we've got some models that have been deployed and are available for us. Let's just go ahead and let's try this. I can't imagine this not working, but obviously you can kind of deploy additional models as you see fit. Now we do need to provide a prompt here. So let's go ahead and do so. Okay, so you're an IT service management agent that can help with listing and creating IT incidents, right? So that sounds pretty good. Now, if we go ahead and run this, we can't do anything just yet because we don't have the tool. Now, the way that I've found, maybe there's other ways of doing this, but what I've found works quite well is if you go back to tools and then you select use an agent and then select the agent that we just created, that will automatically create that linkage. Maybe there's another way, but at least that's what I've found. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say list IT incidents. This will now go ahead and connect to ServiceNow through our logic app and use that connector in order to go ahead and retrieve those incidents. Now we can also go ahead and say create incident. And because our logic app trigger knows that we have inputs required like short description and severity, then it's going to ask us for this. So I'm just going to say Wi-Fi not working. And this is a 1 for critical. And so here, this will go ahead and call out to that logic app and go ahead and make those calls. So this is just a sort of a quick demo just to show you. I know the focus here is more about Copilot Studio, But just wanted to show how when you build these Logic App experiences, they're available from multiple locations. That's the whole sort of idea of the open protocol of MCP. All right, now to get started with, was there any other questions before we take a break? All right, so yes, can you also create automatic testing scenarios? So we do inside of Logic Apps, and this would be on the VS Code side of things. We recently introduced a unit testing framework. And so this is GA now. I think it was this past summer we released it. And yeah, it's fairly comprehensive, where you can go ahead and build out your test cases. We'll do a bunch of mocking. We will also allow you to use a previous run to generate a specific test case so that you can then go ahead and add assertions and things like that. We're looking to, well, not looking, we're actively working on enhancing it as well to support evaluations. So that would be more on the agentic side. I think on the MCP side of things, because at the end of the day, it is just a HTTP request and response. That is something that we can do today, but and look for additional updates there. But yeah, if you go to our tech community blog and then search for Logic Apps unit testing framework, you should see some updates there. Okay. All right. So we'll take a short break. We'll target here. I'll just add a slide just in the event people come back while we're doing this. So short break, back at, we'll say at, let's see, I guess it's, we'll say at 40 after, 40 after the hour. And from there, we'll do sort of a deep dive on the Logic Apps, well, a short deep dive on the Logic App side. And then what we will do is jump over to Copilot Studio, and then we'll keep moving. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for the questions. Feel free to ask. Love to make this as interactive as possible. But we'll see you soon.
The Microsoft ecosystem is evolving faster than ever. Copilot, Power Platform, security, modern work, Azure AI, new features every week, new opportunities every day. But learning is scattered. Events are expensive, limited, and difficult to access. That changes now. Welcome to M365Con, the world's largest online Microsoft 365 convention. 2 powerful weeks, 1 week of workshops, 1 week of free global talks and keynotes. Build your own learning path with expert-led workshops. From Power Platform to security, from Copilot to Azure AI, you choose what matters to you. Then join over 60 free sessions with most valuable professionals, Microsoft trainers, architects, and innovators from around the world. Meet the community, explore the virtual expo, connect with experts, and be part of a global Microsoft experience. Accessible, global, interactive, and designed for every Microsoft 365 professional. M365Con, your community, your learning path, your Microsoft 365 future.
Ever hit mute by mistake and cringe at yourself? You're not alone. Microsoft 365. Life is full of those embarrassing moments that make you wonder about your technical competence daily, it seems. Welcome to M365, our show, where we dish about Microsoft 365, the good, the bad, and the utterly confusing experiences that leave you questioning its true potential daily. No scripted lines appear here. Just real people share their real opinions, and occasionally someone asks, who changed that particular setting again? with visible frustration and confusion. Imagine a show with no slides, no buzzwords, and no screen-sharing panic attacks, just genuine human connections and meaningful conversations that spark new ideas and foster collaboration effectively, always. That's us. Live relaxed and a little unpredictable, just like your chaotic workday mornings, where coffee is essential and deadlines loom, making every minute count and sanity a precious commodity always. We chat about the latest updates, what's busted, and what got renamed. Again, sharing laughs and frustrations over coffee, diving deeper into the changes that matter most to us all daily. And yes, we read the chat, even the turn it off and on again jokes. We cringed, we chuckled, and we felt seen. The humor was palpable, the memes relatable, and the nostalgia was real, making us smile more. Born from the M365ConNet community, M365.show feels like that honest hallway chat after a session. You don't need to be a pro or have all the answers. Just bring your genuine opinion and humor naturally, and be ready to have fun along the spontaneous journey together, always with others. Our vibe is authentic, sometimes delightfully quirky, and always straight from the heart, reflecting genuine emotions and personal experiences that resonate deeply with our audience and create lasting connections naturally. If Microsoft 365 is your daily companion and you enjoy learning with a laugh, you're in the right place with engaging content that's both fun and informative daily. Join live, jump into the chat, engage with others, and watch live coding demonstrations at m365.show, because apparently someone completely forgot to mute their device during the presentation.
Hi, I'm Sean, and I train people to become Power Platform Solutions Architects. If you're watching this, you know Power Platform, but be honest, when you're building the solution, are you using the best tools to solve the problem, or just the tools you know? If you love building powerful, scalable solutions that make your company money, let me share why our training is different. We've noticed that the best architects know a series of best practices and they apply them to every project. So we took all these best practices and put them into this course.
Is your Microsoft 365 knowledge stuck in neutral? Apparently, the community is buzzing with numerous exciting new ideas every single day creatively. At M365ConNet, we've got the vibrant energy of a dynamic conference, distilled daily into insightful doses of innovation and practical forward-thinking strategies for tech. Imagine having experts and creators sharing their unique perspectives daily. That's exactly what we're carefully bringing to the table for you, with thoughtful insights. Our daily live stream was a huge hit, but we knew we could make it.
Welcome to Power Bros Knowledge, where Power Platform meets pure innovation. Your business runs on chaos, approvals lost, data scattered, time wasted. We know that pain. Now imagine automating everything, faster, smarter, and built for impact. That's where Power Bros come in, architects of digital change. We don't talk trends, we build results. Our Knowledge Hub turns expertise into action. Real tutorials, real automation, real impact. Whether it's Power Apps, Automate, Logic Apps, or Entra, we make it work together, smarter. Join the Power Bros movement. 30,000 professionals learning, building, and sharing every day. Ready to transform your workflows? Book us now, and let's build something legendary together.
This is how the systems talk now. No noise, no cracks, just intent. Used to be silos, passwords and drawers, APIs whispering through half-open doors. Now it's one language, written in flow. Every signal accounted, every move in control. From finance to ops to support on the line. We don't duct tape trust, we design it by design. No shadow it, no mystery calls. Every action log when the workflow falls. We don't guess where the data goes. We don't hope that the pipeline holds. We define the path, we set the rules, then let the system do what systems do. We're connecting the enterprise, no borders, no compromise. MCP at the center, tools align, logic flows where trust is defined. Yeah, we're building it once, letting it workflows run. Secure by default, calm under fire, wise without walls, scale without fear. Copilot listening but never alone. Every prompt backed by policies we own. Tools exposed but only what's needed. Principle of least privilege finally heeded. Connect the snapping like modular thoughts. Ops to on-prem every signal call. Human ass system replies with guardrails wrapped around the why. No raw access, no wild request. Everything broken, nothing unchecked. When the model speaks, it's not guessing. It's calling tools with intention. Every workflow signed and sealed. That's how real trust is revealed. We're connecting the enterprise. Through MCP we orchestrate the mind. Logic apps drawing the lines from natural language to action refined. Yeah, we don't hardcode dreams, we compose routines. Secure by default, built to inspire. Wise without walls, but the locks stay tight. This ain't just delegation, it's delegation. Let the eye reason, let the platform decide what can move fast, what stays inside. Observability over anxiety, governance over hope it'll be. If it runs we can trace it, if it breaks we can face it. From trigger to action, end to end, retry logic baked in when conditions bend. Enterprise scale, no heroics required, just workflows humming quietly wired. Audit trail singing in JSON prose. Every step visible, every outcome known. This is how Copilots earn the keys, not by power, by accountability. We're connecting the enterprise with MCP as the spine. Logic apps, tools in time. Every action earned, every call aligned. Yeah, from question to execution, that's governed automation. Secure by default, ready to deploy. Wise without walls, in control we enjoy. So let it reason, let it act, but only inside the lines we map. That's not limitation, that's design. That's how the enterprise moves with time.
All right. Would it be possible to get my slides back up, please? Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining and sticking around. So what we'll talk about now is just a little bit under the hood about what's going on when we create one of these MCP servers. And then after that, we'll jump into the Copilot side of things. And we'll see how from Copilot Studio, we can now go ahead and call and leverage these things that we've previously gone ahead and built. So let's, so from a Logic Apps perspective, we can take existing Logic Apps and also enable them as MCP servers. We don't have to go through those wizards. I think those wizards are great for getting started. I think they're also great for like more simpler use cases where you just have a single connector action. And that wiring up and that parameter experience, I think, is still worth, using it from that perspective. Because as you saw, we created that Salesforce MCP server in a few minutes, and it created 4 workflows. So that's pretty cool. Now, for a workflow to be eligible to be in an MCP tool, it does need to start with this HTTP request. So that's mandatory. And then it also does need to have corresponding HTTP response. So that's also important as well. Now, to enable the Logic App to be MCP sort of supported or enabled, there is a configuration that we're going to see in the host.json file that will help us go ahead and do that. When you enable it by default, it will be set for OAuth authentication by default, but there is some work that you need to do on the app registration side of things. And so that's where in some cases, it might actually be the fastest way is just to go through a wizard to get a Logic App sort of configured automatically. And then you can go ahead and update workflows to sort of meet your needs, right? So you might have more complex scenarios where you've got multiple connector calls or different connectors that participate in that execution, that tool execution. You want to enrich data, things like that. And I will also say that we are working on updated experience so that you won't have to sort of do these configurations that I'm showing you. But, I think it's always interesting to understand under the hood what's going on. But you will see probably within a month to 6 weeks how inside of Logic Apps will provide an experience for you to do all of this configuration yourself. So when it comes to Logic Apps itself, we haven't actually sort of rebuilt Logic Apps or anything like that. Really what we've done is just introduced a layer on top of the workflow engine that allows it to receive and respond to requests using the MCP protocol. We use existing security constructs like OAuth and that easy auth, like that stuff that's been in Logic Apps for a few years now. And we've also introduced key-based authentication for these MCP servers. So for interoperability reasons, you might want to use key-based, and that is also supported as well. Now, I did talk about before how you can go ahead and run these wizards multiple times. And each time you run it, you can kind of create a new MCP server. And we kind of call these groupings unofficially, because what ends up happening is that you can have one single Logic App that has multiple MCP servers, which means multiple URLs or endpoints, but you can still share your compute, storage, and security itself. So this just allows you for more isolation. Like you might have, say, ServiceNow particular MCP tools that are unrelated to Salesforce MCP tools. So why would you want to group them together? You wouldn't. You would want to isolate them because you're going to have agents likely like not needing them both at the same time. And so that's what this grouping really allows you to go ahead and achieve. So let's just take a kind of a quick tour, a lap around the Logic App, and I'll show you what's going on under the hood here. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's do a deep dive into the Logic App configuration. Now we're in the Logic App that we previously updated when we were using API Center. Now we did show a little bit of this, but there was one other piece that I wanted to mention as well. So within a workflow, if we have a HTTP request trigger a corresponding HTTP response action, that workflow becomes eligible to be an MCP tool. Now, as we've kind of alluded to a few times, that tool descriptions are pretty important because it gives the agent and the LLM the ability to understand what the tool is capable of doing. And naturally, when we comes to execution, that becomes important information. So one other piece that I didn't mention before is that we have this notes feature here, and you can go ahead and access this from within a trigger. So just select a trigger and you can see it here. This was the description that we updated in API Center. And as a result, that gets pushed through to this workflow as we go through that wizard. So this looks good, but if we were creating our own MCP tools, our own workflows, we would also want to update this value too. Now, I talked a little bit about how there's some configurations, like we've layered on the MCP server capabilities on top of Logic Apps and our workflow engine. So we want to head back, and there's kind of a few things I want to show you. Now, these are, you don't really need to know these. I'm just kind of going into more details, just providing a deep dive. You shouldn't need to go in and modify these, but just for awareness. So what we've got is in Advanced Tools and then Go, we have a tool called Kudo. And this actually gives us access to the underlying file system for our Logic app that's running. So we can click on Debug Console and then followed by CMD. And then what we're able to do is navigate the file system. So we'll click on Site, www root, and then we've got some configuration files here. The first one we're going to go ahead and explore is called host.json. So this ultimately controls a lot of the behavior of your Logic app. And this is oftentimes where we might include temporary feature flags or stuff like that. Now, one such thing that we've enabled is MCP server endpoints. So through the wizards, when we talk about both API Center and the Foundry Tools catalog, is when we go ahead and register that MCP server, we actually go ahead and add this configuration, and this actually enables that MCP layer for your specific Logic app. So that's something that is here for us. Now, by default, when we're enabling these MCP servers, we will enable API key and OAuth security configurations. Now, you can override that. You can also do anonymous if you want. And we do have some documentation that describes how you can go ahead and do that. Now, the other configuration I wanted to share with you is this MCP servers.json file. So we can go ahead and edit that file. And here we're going to see some familiar properties, right? These were properties that were set during our wizard. So if we go back to the API Center, we were talking about Salesforce, and we gave the name for our MCP server of MCP Workshop Salesforce. We also see the description. That was the description that we provided in that experience. And then we see the tools. And these tools match up with our specific workflows. Now, also note here that this is an array. We've got an array of MCP servers. So what this allows us to do is actually to have multiple MCP servers in this single Logic app. And this would allow you to go ahead and run those wizards multiple times. And what will happen is you would see a new node show up for each MCP server that you actually registered itself. Now, moving forward, we're not expecting people to come in to like modify these values or even sort of view these values. We are working on some configuration inside of the Logic app itself. You'll see an entry here on our table of contents that will allow you to go ahead and manage your MCP server. So the ability to see your URLs, to be able to manage your groups, to be able to remove workflows, add workflows into your existing groups without always having to rerun that wizard if you don't want to. So that is something to go ahead and look for in the near future. But for now, just wanted to explain how this actually works under the hood. Okay, so let's now talk about Copilot Studio, right? So we've got existing tools that exist today, right? So we have prompts. We can go ahead and apply AI to text, document, or images. We have agent flows, right, that allow us to go ahead and execute predictable automations. We've got computer use, where we can interact with web and desktop applications. We've got the connectors, right, much like we've seen in the agent loop side of things, where you can go ahead and leverage those large library of out-of-box connectors to call external services and data sources, and REST APIs, right? So you can also plug in a REST API as you see fit. But we want to talk about model context protocol, because that's another option as well. And so this is where we can leverage an open standard for connecting our agent to data. Now, this is kind of similar to what we talked about before, but I think it's worth restating, is like, if Copilot Studio has connectivity for flows and connectors, why do I care about MCP Server? Because, hey, at the end of the day, if I'm just using the Salesforce connector, why can't I just plug it in? And I think it really comes back to what I opened with around, you might be able to go ahead and build that yourself, no problem. But are you going to rebuild that over and over again? And so this does allow you to unify your enterprise connectivity, especially for some of those standard or sort of core business systems that you have, where having that available across the landscape is also useful. The other thing to think about is that, I think the reality is that enterprises will be building agents using multiple tools, whether that's Foundry, whether that's Copilot Studio, it could be third party, right? Customers do have a lot of options. And obviously, we love to see them using Microsoft tools, but it might not always be the case. And so still being able to build MCP servers so that those can be reused regardless of the stack, I think is a big plus, and it's really important from an interoperability perspective. Now, if we go to the next pillar, we can see the enterprise connectivity needs, right? So what if you do need VNet support? You do need to talk to that SAP system on-prem, or you do need to talk to that SQL Server on-prem. How do you go ahead and do that? What if you need to go ahead and call custom code? What if you do want to add additional security constructs like managed identity? These are all sort of, scenarios that sort of lend themselves to using an MCP server. And then we've got governance as well, where it's like, how do I go ahead and manage this functionally related tools as a single unit, right? Instead of having like a large sort of, people just building tools everywhere. And then how can I also manage separation of concerns, back to that whole idea of like, hey, I want to keep my Salesforce stuff separate from my ServiceNow stuff because functionally they're not related either. So the scenario I want to go through today, I talked about this a little bit before, where we've built our Logic App MCP server. It provides the sort of sales management capabilities that we're interested in. And we want to go ahead and connect that to a Copilot Studio agent experience. And then after, what I do want to talk a little bit is about those out-of-box MCP servers as well, because I think those are valid and actually should be considered as well when selecting your connectivity platform. And so there's some steps that we need to go ahead and address here. One, we need to create an agent in Copilot Studio. And then two is probably where things get a little bit more tedious, where we need to go ahead and, establish, so I guess 2/3. We need to go ahead and establish that connectivity. And naturally, OAuth is always a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of settings that we need to go ahead and address. And I know that there's been some recent work, to help simplify this, that this should only get easier kind of in the future. And then 4, we naturally want to go ahead and test our MCP server inside of Copilot Studio. So I'll go ahead, I'll let the video play, and then we'll come back and talk about it after. All right, so let's head over to Copilot Studio. And here we'll go ahead and start by creating a new agent. So with the desired environment selected, go ahead and click on Agents, and then go ahead and click on Blank Agent. We'll start there. All right, let's start by editing our agent here. Okay, so we'll start with the top and we'll hit edit. And then let's go ahead and provide a name. Now we'll call this CPS agent. And then for our description, we'll just keep this rather simple and just say that this is going to be a sales management capability. So let's go ahead, let's hit save so that we have kind of the base info sorted out here. Okay, and let's see here. So we'll stick with the 4.1, the GPT-4.1 agent, or sorry, model. That makes sense. We're not going to have any sort of trigger here because this is going to be a conversational agent. So what we can do is just skip that part, and then we'll go to instructions. And so here we'll provide instructions on what we want our agent to do. Okay, so you are a sales management agent who is responsible for managing sales leads, opportunities, contacts, and accounts. You will also have the ability to book meetings with customers. So we are going to add that capability once we add the Logic Apps functionality, but we'll just do this all in one shot so that we've got our instructions up to date. Okay, so that's now saved. For our use case, we won't bother with knowledge, although that's a great feature, but for now, we won't worry about that. Next up, we are ready to deal with tools. Now, we can click on Add Tool, and this is where we start to see those various tools that we were talking about in the slides, right? So you do have connectors you can use, you have workflows or agent flows that you can go ahead and use, and then you also have Model Context Protocol. Now, here's where we get some of those out-of-box capabilities, those out-of-box MCP servers, and we'll go ahead and use one of these a little bit later, but the meeting management one in particular. But for now, what we do want to deal with is we want to click on the new tool and then Model Context Protocol. And this is where we're going to need a series of inputs to help us create this connection. So now is a good time where you'd want to go ahead and grab a notepad because there's a series of values that we need to go ahead and retrieve in order to make this successful. What we do need to do is we need to head back over to API Portal first because API Portal is going to give us our URL. We need to start with our URL. Okay, so we're in API Center once again. We want to go down to API Center Portal, click on Settings. Then we'll go ahead and click on View API Center Portal, and then we'll need to go ahead and log in. So we'll log in, and we will find our MCP Workshop Salesforce, and then we will come down here and grab the URL, right? So the endpoint URL, go ahead and copy that, and then paste it into Notepad or the tool of your choice. Okay, great. Now the next place we need to go to is app registrations. Inside of Azure Portal, you click on app registrations, and you can go to either to owned applications or all applications. And here we should see that we have this particular app registration. So this was the one that gets created from API Center and is used inside of the Logic Apps authentication configuration. And this is the one that's going to be of interest for us. Now, there's a few values that we're going to need here, and so unfortunately, I'm going to have to blur these out. These are going to be unique to me, but we do need the application client ID, and we also need the tenant or the directory ID. All right, so go ahead and copy those values. Now, one thing that doesn't take place, even though this app registration's been created for us, we don't have a secret. And we don't need one when we go ahead and use it from like Logic Apps with the Easy Auth because we're using OAuth authentication. So you've got an end user that's typically authenticating with it. Here, what's happening is that Copilot Studio does require the secret or a certificate. And in this case, we're going to use a secret. So let's go ahead and click on New Client Secret. We'll provide a description and an expiration date. I'm going to pause here just so that my secret doesn't accidentally get leaked. But this is a value you're also going to want to go ahead and copy. All right, so we have a secret in place. Now, the next area we want to go to is expose an API. And here we have basically, this is already set up for us. We have a scope. We're going to need this value as well. So just go ahead and copy this to the clipboard because we will need this a little bit later. Now, don't go ahead and close this dialog just yet because we are going to need to come back here in a little bit, and we're going to click on this authentication tab, and we are going to go ahead and add a redirect URI, but we don't have it yet, but we will get one from Copilot Studio. So go ahead and just leave this tab open and we will be back. Okay, so back to Copilot Studio, and we are going to need to provide a name. So here we're just going to call this MCP workshop, and then we will add a dash, and then we will say Salesforce. You do need to keep this to less than 30 characters, so just be aware of that. And then this one, server description, we're going to say this is a sales management MCP server. And then this is where we're going to go ahead and paste in our URL that we obtained from the API portal that we were just in. So we're going to go ahead and paste that. And then what we need to do is go ahead and select OAuth 2 here. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to use manual, and this will go ahead and help us configure all of these values. So we need our client ID and our client secret that we just obtained from the app registration. So I'm just going to pause once again. Okay, so that those values are inputted. Now, their authorization URL. So what this is going to look like is we've got the tail end here. We've got, it ends in OAuth2/v2.0/authorize. This is my tenant ID, which is going to be blurred out. And if we go to the front, we're going to see that we've got login.microsoftonline.com. And so once again, this is my tenant ID that we would need to go ahead and obtain. And that's going to also come from that screen in the app registration where we had the directory/tenant ID. Now, the token URL template and the refresh URL are exactly the same. And so what's going to happen is we've got similar construct here, login.microsoftonline.com. If we go to the end, we will see that it's OAuth2/v2.0/token, and that should be exactly the same for both of these. Now, the scopes, that's where we need, that was from that other screen, that expose API. And so this is where we'll go ahead and enter in this value. Once again, I've sort of blurred out my GUID. You will want to make sure that you have your own. It does end in /user_impersonation, and it starts with API://. Now, here's where I'm going to hit the create button, and if everything goes well, we are going to have a redirect URL that we're going to want to copy. This is the value that we need to go back to the app registration and update it. All right, so that takes a few seconds, but success. So let's go ahead, let's copy this value, and let's put this in a safe place. And then what we can do is click on next to go ahead and add the tool. Actually, maybe just in case, let's head back and just update the app registration first. So let's just head back there. So once again, back in that app registration, we're going to add a redirect URI. And in this case, it'll just be web. And we will just go ahead and paste in this value and then just use the defaults and just click configure. And this will now be added to our configuration. All right, back to Copilot Studio. Then let's hit next. And now we can go ahead and create a new connection. So this should connect. This is why we wanted to update that app registration so that we can, redirect back to the right location. So that's why we wanted to do that. Our connection is now established, so we can go ahead and click on add and configure. And so this will add our MCP server to our agent. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, we're going to see some additional information, but we can see that we've got our tools are all in place, and we do have these tools enabled. So things look pretty good. At this point, we're ready to go ahead and we can start testing and just make sure that this all works for us. Okay, so we won't do the whole test just yet, but what we will, just to make sure this is working, let's just ask for details about the Contoso construction account. All right, looks pretty good. We've got the specific details for Contoso, and looks like our MCP server is working. So that's great. Okay, so we can see here that we've got our MCP server working. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so here we're calling basically a custom MCP server. Now, when we were in that add a tool experience previously, and we clicked on model context protocol, we saw other options show up here. And so what are these? And so these are generally provided out of the box. Now, some of these are custom connectors too. Under the hood, like what we've just created actually is a custom connector on the Power Platform. That's how it sort of bridges that connectivity. But these other ones are, most of these anyways, are considered what we call out of box. Now here, if you think about the Office 365 Outlook connector, that has a lot of different operations, right? That allows you to get like free busy time on a calendar. That allows you to manage contacts. That allows you to send emails, create drafts, all those things. And then here we can see that they've separated it out into multiple MCP servers. And they've done this for good reason. And I would look at this kind of similar to why we have custom MCP servers, is that you might want to have that separation of concerns where you are basically breaking apart functionality and then grouping them into their functional areas so that they kind of, make most sense. And now the question becomes, okay, when do I want to use these versus, using a connector or using an MCP server? And I would say in general, you should use these first if you can, because these are going to be very specific and it's going to be the least amount of work for you and the least amount of maintenance for you to go ahead and maintain these things when possible. Now, there might be some situations where you don't want to go do that and you want to enrich it, customize it, do your own grouping, and that's completely valid to go do that. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an email account associated with this user, so I can't show you the Office ones, which would make a lot of sense to go say book a meeting or send an email, but I can go ahead and use this M365 user profile just to kind of show you this experience, because I think it's still worthwhile going through this. So you go ahead and you create a new connection, and all this is going to do is basically prompt you to log in, and you'll use the logged in credentials of your user, and it'll establish a connection much like it does today when using Power Platform connectors. So we can now go ahead and add and configure, and we'll go ahead and add that to our agent itself. Now, one of, I'd say maybe the downsides of this, but it is manageable, so it's not a huge downside, is that we can actually go ahead and turn on or off different tools. Now, by default, all of the tools are enabled, but we can selectively turn which ones that we don't want to be available. We can turn them off. So, for example, like let's say we didn't want to enable Get My Manager. Now we can go ahead and disable that. So that tool doesn't belong or isn't accessible for my agent. And this would be, I guess, maybe one of the arguments for when you're building your own custom MCP servers, is you can include exactly what you want and what you don't want. Now here, it's a reasonable experience to just disable, turn something on, turn something off, and then go ahead and click save. And that's as simple as it is, but it is something that you go ahead and manage. So what we can go ahead now and do is say, like, get my user profile, And this will now call that MCP server. It is asking for consent here because it uses something similar to on behalf of on the Logic App side that we talked about earlier today. And so this is going to run underneath this security context. So here, that is calling out to that MCP server. It's going to go grab that information and bring it back to the agent. So that is also something just to be aware of, is that these other MCP servers do exist. Now, I would say they're not all made equally. One thing I would say is if we go back and we take a look at like the Salesforce one. So we built our own Salesforce tool, but their Salesforce MCP server isn't as advanced, I would say. Like it's not going to have the same level of operations and that same level of granularity. And part of the reason for this is because we've gone through that configuration experience where we go ahead and choose the entity that we want to like interact with. That's something that doesn't exist on the MCP server for Salesforce. It's going to ask you to go ahead and provide basically their query language. It's not a bad tool for being able to go ahead and query data from Salesforce, but I would argue it's not a great tool for creating data because this is not something that you can configure, right? This is something where you might be able to provide a query, but it's not the same as calling a REST API. And that's why it's kind of important to kind of think of the glue or this configuration that is available to us by going through that wizard, selecting the different properties, selecting whether we want the data to be provided by a user or a model in order to populate a specific request. And so that's something that is to be aware of. I think the other Microsoft ones around email and calendar, those make perfect sense to go use those out of the box. But things like some of these SaaS connectors, especially like Salesforce, that would be an argument to go ahead and just use the connector or package it up as in a custom MCP server as we've shown today in this workshop, and then be able to go ahead and call it. All right, so let's just kind of finish off the demo. We didn't go the full distance here with the Salesforce. So let's just go ahead and complete all of this last mile. All right, so the scenario is that we have an account, and this account is Contoso Construction. They're an important customer for our coffee business. And what's happened is that they have a new manager that has joined the organization. And we do want to go ahead and meet with this person. We'll call him Steve Smith. And Steve, we feel, hopefully can influence a deal. And we have an upcoming deal that we want to close. And we want to use our MCP server and our agent here to help us go through this particular process. All right, so we're going to start by asking, what's the account information for Contoso Construction? All right, so this is cool. We've got the information here. And now what we want to go ahead and do is that we want to create a contact because we've had a meeting with Steve. We feel like the opportunity is in pretty good shape. So let's go ahead and add a contact. All right, so we've added Steve Smith. We probably could have added the email and city, etc., but here we are. Now, what's the scenario is we have opportunities for Contoso Construction. All right, so we can see here we've got this opportunity here. All right, so we'll leave the demo there, and let's head back to the slide. All right, so that's the content that I had prepared for you today, and so just want to once again thank everyone for joining here today. Hopefully, you found that this content was useful and you sort of took away some new learnings. I did want to just share some additional information with you. So I've got another session on Friday. This is in the form of a workshop. And this is going to be more around building those agentic business processes using logic apps. So we'll get the opportunity to use that agent loop, and we'll talk about how we can go ahead and build an IT service management solution using that particular construct. And then the following Friday, so the 23rd, I've got another session where I talk about building agentic business processes in Microsoft Foundry. And so we'll talk more about the sort of integration between Logic Apps and Foundry and how collectively we can build agentic solutions using the combination of Logic Apps and Foundry itself. So do look for those on the conference agenda. And some additional information if you're interested in the MCP server resources. So here's the blog post when we initially launched this. So you'll find some information there. And then also demos. There's a demo blog post where I've got a whole series of other videos that you can use for inspiration. So I'll show you things like SharePoint. You would have seen some of the stuff, like I've got the Salesforce one on there. I've got ServiceNow on there as well. I also talk about Logic Apps sort of under the hood, what's going on from that perspective as well. And so that's sort of another avenue that you can go ahead and explore. And then lastly, just some additional sort of links to my YouTube channel where I try to post there quite frequently. And then also my personal blog, theagentfrontier.com, where once again, you can find a lot of information that I'm constantly providing just around Microsoft and AI itself.
So thank you, Kent. But before we stop, so I have prepared some questions.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think all the questions could be very interesting for the crowd. I love the topic governance, and if I see this topic MCP server, I think about the governance, about this, the security, the compliance, the autonomy. So what are the best practices regarding to MCP server, regarding to governance? What do you think?
Well, I'd say number one, starts with security. I think, that's kind of a good starting point where ensuring that you're using sort of the out-of-box security mechanisms that are in place. I would say another thing that's really important is that discoverability side of things. And I look at that from multiple angles. One would be, the administrators. And then number two would be more the developers. And I think from an administrator perspective, understanding what's in your landscape, understanding like how it's been provisioned, being able to apply different policies. And this is where we're leaning on a lot of the stuff from API Center that allows you to go do that. That's one of the reasons why we started with API Centers, because you can go ahead and apply policies to your MCP servers from that specific property. And then I think the other thing is discoverability from a developer side of things, where reinventing the wheel is never a good thing, right? It oftentimes just leads to a lot of technical debt, and it becomes more difficult to go ahead and manage, right? So I think giving developers the ability to discover what's been built just allows them to save on productivity, but I think it also allows the organization to avoid sprawl, which never sort of leads to good outcomes. I think we've seen that especially with Power Platform, where, hey, this is easy to do. Everyone wants to go do that, which just leads to some inefficiency. So those would be some areas where I'd start.
I think good answer. So, but if an organization wants to start today with MCP server, and what do you think is the smallest meaningful use case for a quickly start? So because Salesforce, not every company has Salesforce, and I think it's a bigger scenario, or could be a bigger scenario, because you need to talk with your Salesforce colleagues in the company and so on. And I think this is an question here.
Yeah, like I think the the one thing that typically resonates with companies as they sort of get early in this journey, obviously some are more ahead than others, but I feel like the IT service management side of things is always a good place to start. I think especially for like technical folks where maybe they're sitting inside of an IT department and they're trying to figure out all of this stuff. It's like, how does this stuff work? What is it useful for? How can I avoid risk? Making sure like, someone's not going to come after them saying, hey, why did you do this? I think that's a really good place to start. And there's naturally, obviously ServiceNow is a pretty popular platform, but there's other platforms as well. Some of them could be older where they may not have like as rich sort of established RESTful APIs or MCP servers. And those could be areas where it's like, hey, I'm going to build an MCP server around this stuff. And then I can start to go ahead and automate my own workflows from that perspective. Actually, now that I'm thinking about this as well, when I look through our telemetry, one connector that is very popular with MCP servers is actually Azure DevOps. So I think that's another example of where teams, development teams have actually built tooling around, their DevOps processes and their sort of work management side of things. And then they can actually plug into them from even inside of like VS Code, right? Where you can go ahead and use GitHub Copilot and then connect to an MCP server that allows you to go talk to DevOps to help manage, bugs, issues, triage, etc. So that would be another, I think, example for getting started if people are kind of working in that space.
Mm-hmm. And regarding security boundaries, how do you define clear trust boundaries when you use MCP servers, and what mistakes could users could do here?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to this, like everything, right? With security, there's like the authentication side of things, and then there's the authorization side of things. And so what I really showed you there was probably more on the authentication side of things, and what you can do. And this is all kind of out of box stuff for us, like on the easy auth side of things, is there is the ability to do further restriction. And so I would say when you're using those MCP servers out of the box, you're going to get authenticated. And it's, you are authenticated to go use this. Now, the question is, are you authorized to go use this is the next question, right? And so there's another layer inside of the configuration in the Logic Apps authentication settings where you can then start to restrict who or like what groups can start to use this as well. So I think that would be, the next step I would also say is like, get your authentication working, but then really think about who needs to be using it and make sure to enable that side of things too.
So I think my best question is coming now regarding to skills and mindset. Do you think we now get and shift from a classical, I would say, Logic Apps Power Platform developer to an agent-centric developer? Is this now it started? I see it in every product, like in Logic Apps 2. And do you think there is a shift to think a little bit different regarding to Logic Apps and MCP? So,
yeah, I think so. I think this is one of the questions I get a lot. And I'm sure folks on like Copilot Studio get this probably a lot too. And it's this whole notion of like deterministic versus non-deterministic sort of use cases. And I think initially people start to think, oh, like I don't know if I have a use case for this, because everyone is very sort of focused on like those predefined paths where it's like, I have my logic, I do if this, if then else, etc. And everything needs to go through a predefined path. And I think that is still valid and should continue to be valid. I think the opportunity is more around like, what are the things that have been very difficult to achieve previously because it was either too expensive or too complex to go codify those types of solutions. And that's where I think the sweet spot of bringing in together deterministic steps when they're needed, and then bringing in the agentic capabilities where those were very difficult to achieve previously. I would say, like, from my perspective, coming historically from a really integration background, contracts were everything, right? Like schemas, XML schemas, JSON schemas, data transformation. Those were all things that had to be in place for that integration to be built. And what that really left on the table as being unmet has been a lot of these like unstructured or semi-structured data use cases. And there's naturally no shortage of those things in the enterprise, especially if we think about documents or even emails and contracts and things like that. And I think that's really where it's unlocked this sort of sweet spot of like leveraging AI to do that, understanding of what's the intent of the request, being able to classify that information, then being able to route it to the according sort of area of the solution to go execute. And that's where you can marry up these deterministic steps with the non-deterministic steps to really go build those solutions that historically have been too complex to build or too challenging to build. And I think that's where I really encourage people just to start thinking along those lines. Like there was an example I saw recently where a person had really hard-coded a lot of these paths. And it was like, and like down the road, like there'll be these other paths, but we're not ready to go do those just yet. And in the meantime, they did a bunch of hard coding like inside of their logic app to do all this stuff. And it's one of those things where it's like, that's like a great use case for, a more agentic processing where you still have the tools that do the transactional calls to the systems, but you've got this sort of, all of these different use cases that are going to emerge. And now you've got to go revisit and do all of these things in order to like wire that up and do regression testing, all of those things, as opposed to maybe thinking more agentic up front and still having the deterministic steps, but having more flexible sort of loosely coupling up front earlier in the process itself.
So yeah, thank you for your answers. I've found this very, very good. Thank you to be here today. It was a very cool workshop. I like it because it's one of my favorite topics, I would say. We see us again on Friday, and tomorrow we'll join Kai Sotter from Switzerland, and we talk about Fabric. And yeah, so at the end, so please stay in the workshop. So we have a pretty good song for Kent prepared, and Mirko will play it soon. So from my side, have a nice day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. This is how the systems talk now. No noise, no cracks, just intent. Used to be silos, passwords and drawers, APIs whispering through half-open doors. Now it's one language, written in flow. Every signal accounted, every move in control. From finance to ops to support on the line. We don't duct tape trust, we design it by design. No shadow it, no mystery calls. Every action logged when the workflow falls. We don't guess where the data goes. We don't hope that the pipeline holds. We define the path, we set the rules, then let the system do what systems do. In the enterprise, no borders, no compromise. MCP at the center, tools align, logic flows where trust is defined. Yeah, we're building it once, letting it workflows run. Secure by default, calm under fire, wise without walls, scale without fear. Copilot listening but never alone. Every prompt backed by policies we own. Tools exposed, but only what's needed. Principle of least privilege finally heeded. Connect the snapping like modular thoughts. Ops to on-prem, every signal call. Human ass system replies with guardrails wrapped around the wire. No raw access, no wild request. Everything brokered, nothing unchecked. When the model speaks, it's not guessing. It's calling tools with intention. Every workflow signed and sealed. That's how real trust is revealed. We're connected. inside, observability over anxiety, government over hope it'll be. If it runs, we can trace it. If it breaks, we can face it. From trigger to action, end to end, retry logic baked in when conditions bend. Enterprise scale, no heroics required, just workflows humming quietly wired. Audi trail singing in JSON prose, every step visible, every outcome known. This is how Copilots earn the keys, not by power, by accountability. We're connecting the enterprise with MCP as the spine. Logic apps, tools in time. Every action earned, every call aligned. Yeah. From question to execution, that's governed automation. Secure by default, ready to deploy. Wise without walls, in control we enjoy. So let it reason, let it act, but only inside the lines we map. That's not limitation, that's design. That's how the enterprise moves with time.